Hello. Thanks for joining Steve and Jane Messianics. This is to my fellow Americans, leftist Americans, Muslim Americans, Democrat Americans who sympathize with people like Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or some of these really just vile, angry, bitter, anti-Semitic individuals who hate Israel and don't think that they should have a right to exist. This is to all Hamas sympathizers in the United States. Hamas has always said they don't want a two-state solution. They don't want any Jews in that area. They think they don't have a right to even live there. This is to you. This is to people who really don't believe Israel should exist as a Jewish nation, where it is, exactly where it is. And I want to put it into perspective for you and hopefully make you really examine your motivations for why you think the way you do, why you feel the way that you do about Jewish people in Israel and about Israel as a nation. So right off the bat, I want to let you know that Israel is the only democracy in the entire area. It's the only democracy where there's free speech, where there's flourishing minorities of people who have rights, even though it's a very religious place for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. Even gay marriage is legal there. You could be whatever you want in Israel, and you cannot in any of the neighboring Arab dictatorships, all who have no human rights and no civil rights. So I'm obviously on the side of Israel, and I always will be until I walk in New Yerushalayim and I celebrate Sukkot, and I can see that doesn't even need to be a light because the God of Israel's Shekinah will be all the light that we need. So check this out. I'm going to put it on the map, and this is really for you that don't like Israel and don't think that Israel should exist. Now pay attention, because I think that I'm going to put it into perspective for you. Okay, so here we see, this is a map of the United States. You could all recognize this, right? This is huge. This is huge. So for this exercise, this is going to be, all these states are going to be Arab countries, right? These are all Arab countries. Arab countries. So these are all Arab countries, all the states. This, Minnesota, this, everything. Everything you see, Arab countries, right? So now let's say the UN says there will be a Navajo state somewhere in the United States, right? So what they do is they find out where did the Navajo live, right? Where did the Navajo live before the United States was established? Where did the Navajo live before all these states became states and were separated by the country that it is? Where were the Navajo living even before the first Europeans came and the South Americans came and all the tribes were warring and displacing each other like what they did? And even the Navajo were displaced for hundreds of years. So let's just imagine, right? This is New Jersey, right? This is the size of Israel in comparison to the Arab countries in that whole area, right? I think there's something like 22 Arab countries. Well, this is the size of Israel right here, right? So let's just imagine for a moment. The UN says this is going to be the Navajo state, right? I know Navajo did not live in New Jersey. Don't mess with me. But let's say this is going to be the Navajo state, right? It's going to be right there. All these other nations surrounding it are all Arab nations, right? Okay, so this is the new Navajo state. The UN says in 2048 that the Navajo state is going to be established right here. Okay, now what do we know about that area? Let's say there's 1 million people there. 1 million people, and out of those 1 million, let's say 300,000 are Navajo that have never left. They've stayed there the whole time. There's always been Navajo people. Let's say when they had a little bit of autonomy in 2047, and before that, they even had a Navajo symbol for their flag, their state flag. They had a Navajo symbol. So Navajo were there. They were there the whole time, right? Now, let's say 2048, the UN says we're going to establish this Navajo state right there, just right here. And so they do that, and right then there's outrage. There's outrage from the people that live there, have been living there, right? Who are just like everybody else. The people living there are just like the people from all these other states, right? And when they do that, all these other states immediately say, this is not allowed. This is too much. This is too much land. They shouldn't even be here. The Navajo themselves have no right to live here. They should not be governing anything in this area. They shouldn't be owning land, anything. Let's just imagine, right in 2048, when they say they're going to establish this Navajo state, all these other countries, they say, we hate these people, we're against them, we'll never support the Navajo state, right? And then the people inside there, they make some demands in 2048, and they say, we only want you to have a tiny strip of land, like this little dot right here. We want you to have that little dot inside there, and then we'll take everything else. Now let's say, like in 1948, like Israel did, they agreed to all the Arab demands. Now the Navajo, let's say they agreed, and they agreed to all the demands of the Americans, right? The Arab states here. That's where we're going to take the place of the Americans. So let's say that this little group of Americans that were in there, some like conservatives, it's acceptable nowadays to just look at them in a negative light, conservative, Americans who are patriotic, right? Let's say that the group of people that were living there were patriotic Americans, right? From all these independent American countries. And the Muslim world is on the same page more than conservative Americans. So let's just say that, okay? And they say no, even though you have agreed to that little dot right there, like the Jews agreed to that little 8-mile strip of land in Israel. They start attacking. They start attacking them, like they start attacking their women and their children, and just crazy terrorist attacks, right? Now, all these other countries here are supporting the people that are attacking the Navajo. That's what happened. Now let's fast forward to like 1967. Remember that, the 6-Day War? So let's fast forward to not 1948, but 19 years, right? 2067. Right now it's 2067. So 2067, there has been 19 years. This whole area in that 19 years has been built up from a completely desolated wasteland where nobody lived. Even the Americans that were living there were nomadic. They would just travel in, hunt, live, do some different things, crimes. Unfortunately, the roving bands of Arabs in that area were committing crimes. Some of them. So let's just say they were committing crimes. They had no interest in the land until the Navajos. The UN established the Navajo Nation, right? So, my kids are watching a movie in the other room. So then, in 2067, let's say the surrounding, these states right here, the old 13 counties, Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Let's say all these nations attack. They attack this little area. And they attack and they say, we want the expulsion of all Navajo from that little spot. We don't want any Navajo in here. We don't want them governing anything. We don't want them owning anything. We want them out. And not just out, we want to kill them. That's what the Egypt and Jordan, that's what everybody was saying leading up to that. Now, what I want to just remind people is that in 1948, Israel were all Holocaust survivors. These were people who survived the Holocaust, and their children and their family members all going to Israel, right? And then all the people surrounding that were formerly, sympathizers and even SS officers and the, Arab Muslim SS soldiers. So this was in 48, and then in 67, these were Holocaust survivors fighting against former SS Nazi officers, people who just adored the German Nazi army. They adored them. They loved them. They wanted the same things, and that's why they got along so well. That's why the Arab Muslim world was so tightly allied with Nazi Germany, because they had the shared hatred of the Jews. So in this case, let's say there's a shared hatred of the Navajo. So the Navajo are here, and now it's 2067. They've been a state for 19 years. They've had this tiny, tiny little state, constantly under attack, constantly jihadi attacks from the, let's say, from these American states, right? They're constantly, and then in 67, all of them send their armies in there, vastly overpowering this tiny little state, right? And then what happens? In 2067, the Navajo state defeats them. They defeat them all, handily, on multiple fronts. They defeat them in the north, and they defeat them in the west. They defeat them in the south, and the Navajo Nation wins. So they win the war in 67. Stay with me now. If you can't use your brain and keep up, you're in the wrong place. Maybe watch a cartoon. So in 67, imagine with me, they win. And then when they win, the UN, everybody has a meeting, and they have more land demands from these countries and from the people in this little area that are staying there. They're staying. And then people are coming all over. Americans are coming, like just traveling. Like they want to flood with population this little area of people that hate the Navajo. And that's what happened. And so what they do is that say the Navajo agree. Let's say the Navajo agree in 67 after defeating all these countries that wanted to exterminate them, that used Nazi-type rhetoric, right? The whole time. Now let's say that after the Navajo state, the new Navajo state that's been there for 19 years, in 2067, after defeating all these countries, agrees to 99% of all the land demands of the people living in here and the people from the outside who had lost. They agreed to 99 and offered to compensate them for the 1% they couldn't agree to. And then these nations and this little group that's in here that hates the Navajo but wants to stay there, they start attacking. They reject it. They reject it. They won't let them agree. Even though the Navajo agree, they say, no, you can't agree. So after that, they start attacking. More jihad, more this American, they start attacking the Navajos again. From outside, sending in money to the Americans living in here that stayed and are constantly attacking and are saying, the rhetoric never changes from 48 all the way to 67 and afterwards, after they were defeated. The rhetoric never changes. They say, we want to kill all the Navajos. Navajo has no connection to the land. We don't want them here, nothing. Now, let's just consider that if you look at the facts in this hypothetical situation, let's just say this little area, the Navajo are not in New Jersey, but let's say they were. Now, in the reality, the Jews have always lived in Israel. They've never left. Now let's imagine here for this little area that the Navajo had always been there. There always been some Navajo that had a strong connection to the land. If you look at every single French and English explorer that went to Israel in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, before it was established, it was desolated. They said nobody wanted to live there. There was no connection with the Arabs there. They were just nomads, and the Jews were always living there and always had a strong connection to the land, even if they were suffering under the Muslims, which they always were. So let's say they're in New Jersey, and everything you unearth, every single archaeological dig, there's nothing from the Americans that claim to have this connection to this land. Nothing. They find nothing. Nothing in English, nothing in Celtic or anything, German or any of the languages of their ancestors that came from overseas, right? Let's say there's nothing, and you go back 2,000 years, 2,500 years, 3,000 years, and you find only Navajo artifacts. Everything is Navajo, 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 Navajo. Not even the other tribes that displaced them over the centuries, only Navajo. Let's say everything you find is Navajo. Everything is written in Navajo, or whatever language the Navajo spoke, Lakota or whatever it was. Let's say only language you find in those old archaeological digs are Navajo. And everything you find is written in the Navajo language. Everything that's depicted is them. You find evidence of their kingdoms, their culture, on and off. And then the entire time, they were small groups of Navajo living there. Let's say you look at the state flag from 2047, and let's say there was a Navajo symbol on the flag, because if you look at the flag of quote-unquote Palestine from 47 and 46 and 45, there's a Star of David on the flag. They've always been there. They've always been in Jerusalem. So you look, let's say this Navajo nation, right? Every archaeological thing you see is only Navajo. And now let's say from all these other countries, there was little groups of Jews, or little groups of Navajo, right? Little groups, always, constantly, for 3,000 years, traveling constantly to Navajo Nation. They call it Navajo Nation, never changed. Navajo Nation, there's always the same, always from all the way far away, all going here. They're all going there. And then these other countries, Arab countries, or American states, or American countries, whatever, in this hypothetical situation, they never were constantly traveling here. There was never a constant, steady stream of the American people, or Arabs in this case, to this spot where there's this Navajo Nation. And so now after 67, there's 40, 50 years, constant, let's say this little group of Americans that has been just swelling because everybody's sending people there. Even though they're wealthier, they're sending people there. All the refugees everywhere. Go here. Displace the Navajo. And all the rhetoric never changes. We never want the Navajo to rule the state. All these huge countries. And that's what's going on in the Middle East. Israel's the size of New Jersey. Israel's got 9 million people. 7 million are Jews. The whole rest, it's like a drop in the bucket. All these are Arab countries. Prior to to Islam, prior to Muhammad, all of Arabia, Persia, the whole area, North Africa, there were groups of Jews, groups of pagans even. There were groups of Christians. And they were all coexisting. But after that, it was only Muslim. So in this case, this would be 1,300 years of, say, only like the American rule. And then now we have this new Navajo state, and all these countries are up in arms saying this is somehow wrong. They're saying this is not right. This is an injustice against all of us. That's what they're saying against the Navajo state. Or, as we're calling it, Israel. Because that's the name of the country. That's the name of the country we're talking about. Israel. That's the name of it. Israel. And Israel has a right to be there. There's always been a steady stream of Jews going there. 2,500 years at least. Every archaeological dig in Israel, Hebrew, Jewish, Judea, Israel, land of the Jews. Rome, this is just another little history lesson. Rome, when the Jews rebelled in Israel, changed the name of Judea, Israel, they plucked the name out of the scriptures of their ancestral enemy, who were what? Philistia, or Philistines. Philistia. Or Palestine. It was an insult. It was an insult. And it was meant to sever the connection of the Jewish people to this tiny little place that was their homeland. And all of these other countries are constantly supplying little tiny group here that is dedicated to wiping out this little dot. Now, for more perspective, let's say this little this little spot, the Navajo Nation, now after they're made in 2048, 2067, there's the war. Now let's say after all that, these nations are all still saying, this is wrong, they should still not exist. We're still going to constantly equip this little group of rebels with money and weapons, and we're going to pay, like women when they blow themselves up, we're gonna pay their families. If a guy kills some Navajo people, we're gonna send them millions of dollars. Even our own American government has sent money to pay for these, martyrs who killed totally innocent Jewish people, Jewish women, Jewish children. These families are getting paid millions of dollars, because supposedly they're good martyrs who fought against this little tiny country right here. Now imagine that all these countries, right? All these countries, they oppose this. They oppose them. This country is free. even though they're ultra-religious, a third is ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox, even though they're religious, you could still have gay marriage. You could still do all these things that the religions all would disagree with. You could have free speech. You could criticize the government. If you're not a Navajo, you could still be elected to office. I was listening, there was this Arab Muslim Supreme Court judge in Israel that put some Jewish people in jail. So how's that possible if it's not free or Arabs aren't free there? So, I mean, check that out. So let's say in the Navajo Nation that we're talking about, this fictional place, let's say that in the Navajo Nation, there are people who are from these groups, who don't even like the Navajo Nation. You know what? They're living there, and they're citizens, and they're being elected to the Supreme Court. They're getting elected to public office. Mayors. That's impossible in these Arab places. So let's say that all these Arab countries, right? All of them, every single one, every Arab country that's here, all of it, that has so much more in population than this. This is just like 1% of all landmass. And Israel is actually, in comparison to the Arab world, is actually much smaller than all of this landmass. This comparison, New Jersey, they say Israel's the size of New Jersey. Compared to all these states, it's actually smaller because Israel is about 1% of all the landmass in the Middle East and the Muslim world. So it's actually smaller. That should change your perspective even more. Now let's consider if all these countries around that were different religion that just hated the Navajos, let's say all of them are dictatorships. All these are dictatorships. Some of them are religious dictatorships, like Iran, right? They're all dictatorships. No human rights in all of them. There's no human rights. If you blaspheme, there's blasphemy laws. If you speak against their religion, let's say it's Christianity. In the 1500s, John Calvin said that in Leviticus, when he wasn't a dispensationalist. He said the quotes in Leviticus, the scriptures saying that people should be put to death if they blaspheme. John Calvin actually encouraged the church in Geneva to do exactly that. If you blasphemed or criticized the church, they would drag you around and flog you and beat you. They burned one guy. They dragged him and his wife out of his house. They burned their house down and made him watch. Martin Luther, he wrote on Jews and their lies. He encouraged Christendom to burn down synagogues and beat rabbis. They did all kinds of stuff. Roman Catholics celebrated Christmas by force-feeding Jewish men and then chasing them through the streets while people celebrating Christmas pelted them with garbage and debris. So, that's actually a good example. Let's say they're all Christian and they're all in that mindset. And all those Muslim countries with these rules. This is 2023. This isn't 1400 or 1500s. You got to keep that in mind too. This is very backward. So let's say all these countries, all the countries, right? All these Christian little countries that outnumber them 100 to 1. Let's say they're all dictatorships, and most of them a woman that doesn't have any rights. A woman can't own things and just live her own life. She can't have her own house and her own freedom. In a lot of these countries, if a man beats his wife and the wife calls the police show up and ask the wife, "What did you do?" They don't actually arrest the man. Let's say in all these countries, let's say in half of these countries, a woman is not allowed to play sports in public. Let's say a woman's not allowed to play sports in public. She's not allowed to show her ankles, and she's not allowed to show her shoulders. She could be beheaded. Let's say in some of these countries, if a woman shows her hair in public, she can be executed or shot dead with a machine gun. That was happening in Iran. I don't know if people were paying attention to that. It was horrible. A lot of innocent women, young women, just trying to have the freedom to show their hair, were murdered, tortured to death. Just keep that in mind. So let's say all that's going on in all these countries right here. You feel stupid now? If you hate Israel, do you feel stupid? You should. You should feel like a scumbag. Right now you should. It should all be coming to a head right now. All these countries are dictatorships. They're dictatorships. You don't have any rights. You don't have any rights in all these places. Just right here in the new Navajo Nation, this place that you think is so terrible. You think the Navajos are so terrible, they shouldn't live there. They have no right to live there, even though there's always been a steady stream of Navajos there. There's always, every archaeological dig finds only Navajo stuff, Navajo language, Navajo people, even if they were displaced, and the Navajo people always stayed there, even if they were forced to be expelled, murdered, exterminated, ethnic cleansed. They stayed in their land. That's their land. This is Israel, Israel, Israel. It's this tiny little place, tiny little place, tiny little place compared to all this. And there's this outrage. There's this outrage that they shouldn't exist. Zionism, people say Zionism are Nazis. Zionism is the belief that there should be a Jewish state just like this, in a sea of Muslims that absolutely hate their guts just because they're Jewish. All of these groups, now imagine if they're like Hamas. Hamas is dedicated in the second line of the Hamas constitution. It says that Islam will destroy Israel or retake Israel, so, or Palestine, or whatever. Now imagine if all these countries were constantly saying death to the Navajo Nation on Twitter, having marches. Let's say there was marches here, California. Let's say all the way over here, there were people here that just hated them. They rarely went there. They hated them. Let's say all these people, when they prayed, turned their back to this place and they turned their faces somewhere else. Let's say they turned their back when they prayed. Why are they so desperate to kill all these people here? That doesn't really make sense, does it? Just like it doesn't make sense to oppose a Jewish nation. It doesn't make sense to oppose Israel, the Jewish state. That's what that is. If you're opposed to this little Navajo nation, if you listen to everything I said, and there's even more of a case for the state, a Jewish state of Israel, than there is for a Navajo nation. If you oppose this little Navajo state, you oppose Israel, there's something else going on. You have something dark in you. And that is absolutely not right. Absolutely not right. I'm going to read Psalm 33. Adonai looks out from heaven. He sees every human being from the place where he lives. He watches everyone living on earth, he who fashioned the hearts of them all and understands all they do. A king is not saved by the size of his army, a strong man not delivered by his strength. To rely on a horse for safety is vain, nor does its great power assure escape. But Adonai's eyes watch over those who fear him, over those who wait for his grace, to rescue them from death and keep them alive in famine. We are waiting for Adonai. He is our help and our shield, for in him our hearts rejoice, because we trust in his holy name. May your mercy, Adonai, be over us, because we put our hope in you. And we stand with Israel, this little tiny speck of land in a sea of Arab dictatorships with no rights, women of no rights, that have a religion that is founded on a man who despised Jewish people and Christians. It says in the Quran that people of the book, the Jews and the Christians who don't follow Islam, are the worst of human beings. And it says even worse about pagans. Now, I know plenty of Muslim people, and in fact, I would encourage you all to read the book Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. I say Yeshua. There's a book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus that is a man named Nabil Qureshi, who was the son of a nuclear scientist, who was a Navy veteran, and he would enjoy challenging American Christians who really knew very little about the scriptures, and some who were very lukewarm, and he loved it. Because he was saying, the Shahada, saying all these prayers, and was very religious, very well-versed, and not just the Quran, but also the New Testament, the Tanakh. And later, when he went to medical school, he met a man named David Wood, who's very knowledgeable about Islam. And he was moved and encouraged in the sincere pursuit of truth to leave Islam and to believe in Yeshua. And of course, he had this kind of Western Christian view, but he was brilliant. And if you go on YouTube, you could see he has his testimony. Just type in "Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus" presentation, and he gives like a couple great presentations. So I want to thank you for watching my little explanation, because that's really how it is. If you're against the establishment of Israel as a Jewish nation, I just went through a little bit of the history. Read the history. I'm not saying the IDF was innocent, or that the Jewish people were perfect or innocent in any way, but that is their home. It's their ancestral home. They deserve to live there. A lot happened when they established that state. And there was never an agreement by the other side. And if there was an agreement, as soon as the Jews agreed to it, they started killing them. The Arabs started killing them. So Israel has a right to exist. It's like having a little dot in New Jersey and all the rest of the states joining together and hating that little place, and then sending tons of people and saying they're refugees all to that little place, these oil-rich countries. You know, the history is even uglier than if you don't know about it and you're just saying like, open-air prisons, Zionism, all this stuff. If you're using all these like buzzwords, genocide is super ignorant. So ignorant. There's no genocide going on. The people right now that are fighting against the terrorists are the grandchildren and children of Holocaust survivors. And people who survived all the wars and attacks from all these Islamic countries that were full of, former SS officers who loved Hitler. So I want to give you a challenge that if you know any Muslim people, ask them if they think Hitler was bad. Because I've been asking people online that are Muslim, do you think Hitler was bad? Can you just say yes or no, and they won't say yes or no. They'll explain all this stuff. They'll start explaining. If you ask somebody, do you like Hitler, yes or no, and they start explaining and they can't say yes or no, pray for that person. So this pumped me up, and this is really it. It's like having a little Navajo nation inside New Jersey that has like 9 million people in an area where there's like millions and millions, like a billion. There's a 1.8 billion, 1.2 billion Muslims in the world. Well, you know how many Jews there are? There's 13 million Jews, I think, in the world. So the Jews were around during the time of India. Right now I think there's over 1 billion Indian people, but there's only 13 million Jews because they've been constantly killed, hated, and murdered everywhere they've been. So, and they've been mistreated by the Christian West, by Europe and in the United States. We're not immune at all. That history is very ugly too. So I encourage you all, especially those people that hate the idea of a Jewish state, Israel, and you think it shouldn't exist, my advice to you is read a book, because that's what you need to do. Israel is the Jewish state, always has been, always will be.